Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. First of all, best of the season to everybody around the table, and hope you have you're great to work the TAC meeting into all the busyness that exists this time of year to begin with. Let me see if we can begin by reflecting a little bit on where we've been. I think, without prejudice, you all are concluding the most productive year that a TAC has had in the long and illustrious history of this institution. Whether it's bringing forth and highlighting the challenges of the PSTN future, or catalyzing the FCC and the NTIA to pull together on the challenges that are related to IPv6, or to identify the opportunities and challenges in the need to share our scarce resources, network resources and technologies, or to recommend an action to the President of the United States insofar as using federal property to build, to enable an essential component of the broadband infrastructure. And those aren't exactly either over-the-horizon topics or theoretical topics. They are real, manifest today, and the work that this group has done, and each of you have done individually, is what has made that all possible. I mean, some of the groups, as you know too well, have had weekly calls. I've been on Sunday night calls. And people have really rolled up their sleeves. 3 different workshops put together by you all. And so you should all feel, I hope, proud about what you collectively and individually have contributed to this process, this agency, over the last 12 months. And of course, it would be highly remiss if we didn't also call out the great work of the FCC staff that has backed up all of that. Walter Johnson, our official person here, Julie Knapp, Chris Lewis, Lisa Gelb, Mike McKenzie, Dina Shelter, and John Leibowitz, all who have their own ongoing responsibilities at this agency, and still found time to work with all of us. And what you haven't seen is the backroom work that they all have been doing as we would get together on a regular basis to try and coordinate amongst the various groups and work on just how does the agency deal with the kinds of issues that you all were raising. And so these people have been making significant contributions themselves. And of course, all of this was to facilitate the mandate that we had from the chairman to address growth opportunities, both in investment, innovation, and employment that could come from this agency and from the kinds of activities that we're all involved in. So, as we draw to the end this first year of this new TAC, I hope that you all take a moment to pat yourself on the backs and recognize the contribution and the significant level of work that has been done. You should all be proud and pleased, and we thank you, all of you. Let's talk about a little housekeeping and what we're going to do today. First of all, We have a rookie down here that we need to call out, and the hazing begins shortly, Charlie. But Charlie Vogt, who is the CEO of GenBand, new member of the TAC. So, Charlie, thank you. Glad you're here and you can join us.
Well, I'm sorry that I've missed all the excitement over the last couple of sessions.
There'll be more.
As you heard, it was only work. You know, you could just,
Especially considering we own 60% of all the PSTN switches and 40% of all the VoIP switches, so I'm glad to be here on the tail end of it.
Well, we're glad you're here, Charlie. Let's talk about some housekeeping issues. One, the TAC in 2012. As you know, the TAC is appointed by, the TAC members are appointed by the chairman. Those of you who are interested in serving next year on the 2012 TAC, your appointment will roll over. If you are not interested in serving, let me know or let Walter know, and we will make the appropriate adjustments. There have been some changes in our makeup over the year as some people have taken new jobs, some people's companies have been sold and they've rolled off, and those folks, we will be coming back with a series of recommendations that the chairman will review. It has to go through the ethics vetting and all this sort of thing, but presumably we will have some new members by the time we get together in the first quarter of 2012. If any of you have suggestions, either in terms of the generic type of representative or a specific representative, again, please let Walter or me know. There's no assurance. This is something the chairman has to make a decision on. But if you've got suggestions as to who or the kind of people, please let us know. Ben.
Is it the case that we need do nothing if we are willing to serve next year, or do we have to confirm that with you?
You have to do nothing. This is opt out. Vent, this is opt out. Okay?
Let me rephrase that.
Can we throw up the slide with the tentative 2012 dates? Because we've got some dates that we want to share with you. There may be on one of these a conflict or getting tight to a conflict with CTIA in their show in the March date, but we've been trying to juggle dates that worked on a bunch of different agendas, and what we ought to do is leave it this way: that you please take note of these. Let us know if there are significant difficulties we think there may be with the March one. Is that right, Walt?
Actually, there's shows in May this year.
Shows in May. What do I know about CTIA?
Tom, we moved it. In fact, given the difficulty in scheduling this, if we could even just get a tentative
show of hands here.
Show of hands.
Are these? Let's just. Does the March date work? Who doesn't the March date work for? Does not. Does not. Okay, March is in. Adam, you got problems? But
Can we put the geograph up again?
oh, okay. Yeah, March 28. Can we throw it back up,
Yeah.
guys, please?
Photographs.
It's okay. It's on the handout. That's right. Thanks, Casey.
AV, can we have the slides up, please?
March 28. Going once, going twice. March 28. June 27. We have a problem, okay. We have one. Two, you got,
I'm away, yes. Nothing will help. I'm away for a month.
okay. Let's see, so we've got two that we really got to worry about. Let's see what we can do. I mean, it may be, guys, that we may miss you.
In fact, just to help me, are we looking at, if we move it back a day, or is it a week?
A day would help.
In my case, it's just either the week before or week after is fine, it's just that particular.
It's that week is shot.
A week before, or a week after?
Before works week after.
A week before, all right, so let me say a week before then. I can't promise that, but I will.
We
look
move a
into it.
week before, does that cause agita for anybody?
A week after is
This could be the
better?
most controversial discussion we have today.
Week before, we're splitting on the week befores and week afters.
You're talking about June?
Yes.
Yeah.
Matter if you, even if you did it the day.
All right.
Okay, September 25.
Mr. Chairman?
Sir, yeah, I'm sorry.
September 25, the evening starts Yom Kippur. I don't know if that's a politically good date for us or
That's a
not.
serious issue,
All
okay?
right. September 24th, I assume is...
Okay, so we're on September, well, let's go to September 24 then.
I'll be eating on the 24th.
The, and then December, 10 or 18, is there a preference that anybody has on that? I would bet earlier in the year,
Yeah.
10 is better.
All right.
Okay, great, perfect. So we've solved that issue. So one of the things we're going to be doing today is beginning to identify, to winnow down, a list of potential topics for next year. And we will come back to you early in 2012 with suggested lineups for whatever the working groups are that you all decide today you want to head towards. And we are hereby soliciting, again, your indication of interest in work group and in leadership of work group. And this will just be like the Army, those who don't volunteer will be assigned. So, with that as the kind of the overview, the housekeeping, let's take a look at what today's meeting is going to look like. We're now at 12 minutes past the hour. We're going to adjourn, as we always do, promptly at 4 o'clock to respect your time. We're going to divide the meeting today into two parts. The BC and AC, before the chairman and after the chairman. The chairman is going to be here between 2:15 and 2:30. And I am hopeful that before the chairman arrives, we will be able to have had the readouts from the 3 workshops and Dan's, you haven't met Dan Kirshner yet, I'll introduce him in a second, but Dan's report to us on what's going on insofar as the thinking in the chairman's office and the commitments that have been made to moving forward on the suggestions that you all have made and what you have done to flight the whole PSTN issue up to the top of the heap. So hopefully we can get through those topics by the time the chairman gets here, and then following the chairman, deal with Adam and David's report from their working group, Dennis, Charlotte, and I guess we're going to draft Mike to do the broadband report. I know this is a lot of preparation, but you've got a half hour before you have to do it. Then we'll talk about the 2012 work effort, but just to give some planning guidance here. So let me first introduce, and he'll come and he's got a presentation to make to you after the workshop report. But Dan Kirshner is a creation of your efforts. Is that a fair statement, huh?
Yeah, it's just conjured out.
Conjured out of whole cloth. That the focus that this body put on the PSTN related issues. Really help the chairman and the chairman's office begin to focus on how this is something that needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later, and for which a process leading through various steps needs to be taken immediately, starting immediately. So he has made a commitment of staff. He has made a commitment to the need to proceed down this path without making judgments at this point. And Dan is on point on the whole exercise and will be giving us, after the workshop reports, an overview of the thought process of the commission insofar as PSTN is concerned, and the role that we will all have in providing technical input to key issues related to the whole future of the PSTN. So, again, because of the work of this group, this issue has new focus, new attention, dedicated leadership, and again, I think we can point to that as a result of the good work that all of you have done. So let's start off with a readout on the various workshops. Jesse, I think you're up with the small cell. I will not throw this to you, Jesse. We'll pass the clicker around.
Gently and carefully.
Gently and carefully. Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks so much, Ray. Let me, before I get started, I think I'd like to take the time out to really recognize the FCC staff, and particularly John and his team. They did yeoman's work in putting this together, organizing and structuring. The committee and many people that collaborated around this made several recommendations as to speakers. We're probably oversubscribed in terms of speakers and panel members, and John and them did an excellent job of organizing and sorting that out, and came up with two, see if I can bring the charts up here. Oh, there it is. Let's go to the next one. The small cell forum was held on October 28th. I have to do it, right? There you go. It was actually set up and organized as three separate panels where we addressed the state of the technology, the standards, and we had excellent representation from several places, not just the standards bodies and forums, but also various companies that are investing considerable amount of effort and technology to develop this new line of technology and products. So that was the first panel. What came out of that was that the technology is here today to really lead in this area in the United States. There's a tremendous opportunity in the United States to be one of the first countries to start to deploy these types of networks inside of high teledensity areas. We didn't just look at in-building systems, we looked at all high teledensity areas. And so that was a lot of the work that was done by John and the task, at least the panel that did that work. Probably one of the things that I thought was a highlight of this particular forum was the luncheon speaker. One of the issues that had come up throughout the year as we studied this area, was not just to support smartphones and tablets inside of these high teledensity areas, but to identify new networks, medical secure networks for hospitals, the energy management systems for buildings. So there were a lot of new networks and new network applications that were possible with new spectrum, if that spectrum was available, was one of the issues that came up. And the luncheon speaker spoke of the healthcare industry and the opportunity to leverage these types of technologies in that particular segment. The second panel dealt more with the business opportunity. One of the things that we did here, not only did we reach out to the real estate industry, we also reached out to the investment community as well and got their input in terms of, well, what types of things could we do in this area that would stimulate investment to create new jobs, and we got a lot of good feedback from them as well. But on the real estate industry side, the current deployment of Wi-Fi offload networks was a major thrust that is being pushed by many of the national carriers, and that is going very well, and considerable amount of deployments throughout the United States in that space. DAS systems, which are the distributed antenna systems, we saw that there was tremendous investment being made in those by national carriers throughout the United States. We then brought in the representatives both from the DAS industry segment as well as Wi-Fi, as well as the real estate industry segment, based on the way John them organized it, did an outstanding job of saying what the challenges are, what needs to be done, and what they would recommend that we consider in terms of recommendations that would come out of this effort. The last one was the national carriers. We had representation from Sprint was one of the main speakers on there, but also we had representation from the cable companies that spoke there as well. Both very supportive of the deployment of these small cell networks and utilizing the existing spectral resources that we have for developing small cell networks. The final panel was more policy direction. That was mostly, the panel members were representatives from the TAC, and they shared their opinion on a host of issues, such as universal small cells, the need for new spectrum, the use of Wi-Fi unlicensed spectrum applications, and so forth. So we also had a very rich discussion around spectrum and around the idea of creating a new licensing scheme that might be different than unlicensed as well as a licensed spectrum, something in between that, which we refer to as sort, at least the FCC and others refer to as license light or spectrum light. So that's really was the heart of the forum. The final recommendations came out as follows, right? We looked at some of the economic benefits in terms of improvement in broadband wireless coverage and capacity. Many of the existing solutions, whether you're offloading spectrum with Wi-Fi offload or using DAS to improve coverage, the real issue was to meet the expanding demand for bandwidth inside of buildings caused by tablets and other types of devices and smartphones, and the need to actually grow capacity inside of buildings. We also looked at potential cost reductions of using these systems to more efficiently utilize the spectrum and improve the performance of the devices. Given that the amount of power that would be radiated from these types of devices, we saw that you would get energy improved the energy utilization or reduction in energy utilization. And finally, the spectral efficiency issue was probably one of the most interesting ones that we examined. The final thing that we felt this particular recommendation held the most promise for creating new jobs, because you had the potential of creating potentially a whole new industry segment, similar to what we saw many years back in terms of CLECs. You could see something in the order of a wireless CLECs doing these kinds of deployments, which would create a substantial number of jobs. The other items were some of the key technologies that could be used. There is a new standard, new technologies that has been standardized out of the 3GPP that open a lot of promise for building these types of networks. Some of the challenging issues had to do with backhaul. How do you share backhaul? Who should deploy some of the backhaul to the buildings, inside of the buildings? Should the real estate industry participate in this to try to get the cost down of deploying these types of systems? And ultimately, the availability of new spectrum to deal with the capacity demands, even though there's considerable amount of spectrum with carriers that are available inside of these buildings. We also felt that there needs to be additional spectrum made available for these applications because of the increasing demand for the kinds of devices that are currently being deployed. And it came down, and I think Dennis is going to talk about this in our report later, to two basic recommendations that came out of this effort. The first one was the need for the carriers to mobilized, working with the standards bodies to move toward universal small cells that would work in all of the frequency bands, such that any phone, any device that went inside of a building could get access to the network with the same performance. And that's one of the benefits of these universal small cells within licensed spectral bands. The other one was we looked at the spectrum in the 3550 to 3650 area and felt that that's 100 megahertz of spectrum because it was not necessarily great for nationwide auctioning, would be ideal spectrum to make available for these small cell networks. So that was pretty much, Tom, what went on over about 8 or 9 months of debating this topic, right?
Thank you, Jesse, for leading this, a great workshop, and for setting the standard of a 10-minute report for everybody else to follow. We'll be back, and Dennis, you're going to address these recommendations specifically in your report, right? Okay.
Can I have one thing?
John?
On the previous slide, there was an X and a Y.
Oh, yeah, right.
The X stands for hordes, and the Y stands for multitudes. So it's the people. Very well attended.
We figured that it would be like any commission decision that we had to wait till later to find out what it really meant. Sir, Ben.
A reminder for people who are using the microphone, if you're not speaking directly into the microphone, the captioning doesn't work, so please pay attention to that.
Okay, so we've got the next workshop, which was the workshop on the 6th of December. Adam, out of your group, who's going to... Russ is doing the honors. Take it away, Russ.
Okay, can you put up the slide, please? I don't need the clicker, there's only 2 slides, so anybody can do it. Okay, so first I would like to call out the FCC staff. They did a tremendous job, and particularly Lisa Gelb, who led this and took all the recommendations, and I'll call them recommendations or demands, they really were, from the group, and squeezed in 2 days of discussion in 4 hours. So thank you for that, Lisa. The focus of the first workshop on December 6th was on rural services, disability access, and transition of critical services for medical and alarm systems. There were quite a few comments in terms of rural. The idea being that all technology options really need to be considered. There is not a one technology fits all approach, and even satellite was one of those technologies. We had representation from satellite companies, and there's some new deployments that are going to really make some good inroads for the rural areas. The other thing was it's going to take a lot of funding for rural. The cost for middle mile and last mile is much more expensive than in urban markets. Some of the figures that were shared were 400 to 800 times X of what it cost in an urban area for that middle mile piece. And a lot of that has to do with the distance as well as the lack of interconnect options that are available to those folks in a rural area. There was a little bit of discussion in terms of how to avoid a digital divide. The idea being that there should be the same level of access in urban markets as in rural markets. A couple of the speakers really did take it sort of personally that they felt people need to not assume people in rural areas do not need that level of service. It is really a fair and level playing field, so we need to make sure that everybody gets that level of access. In terms of the disability access services migrating to all IP networks and new technologies, the interesting thing there is we were told by quite a few of the speakers that is a very proactive group. They are very open to moving to new technologies that give them much greater capability and benefits and access to services. One of the interesting comments to me was that the blind community had adopted the iPhone they didn't have specific numbers. One of the figures thrown out was 70 or 80% penetration just because it was such a ease of use issue and helped them with getting that communication across. And when you think about it, there are no tactile keys on an iPhone, but there was still that high level of penetration and use. So what they were trying to say, though, is that there is this very proactive base of users in that community. The other things that were rather interesting, TTY usage is declining very quickly, but it was brought up disability access needs will probably be on the rise as some of us age through the population database. As the boomers now become the majority, so to speak, of the population. So we may tax the system in terms of what's needed. Let's see, there was not, the other comment was, the users really don't care, and I think this is something we all need to take into consideration. The users don't care what the underlying technology is. All they care about is it works. You know, when you make toast in the morning, do you think about electricity? Or do you think about, you know, what you're going to put on your toast? You don't really care how it's cooked. So the bottom line is we need to keep that in consideration. There needs to be this nice, smooth transition and the ability for folks to move to the new services. Standards will play an important role. There's also the reason why people are adopting these new technologies. They provide so much more capability in terms of mobility and new applications, which just outweigh the PSTN today. The other question or discussion that came up that was fairly interesting was how much backward compatibility that would be required. And everybody agreed we do not need 100% backward compatibility. There are certain services that will just die off or disappear over time. So that's also something that will have to be looked at during the transition to a non-PSTN type network. What services will survive and which ones won't, or which will have to have backward compatibility. There was a strong comment about the communication and education for the community so that the transition would be smooth. And keep in mind, this was in the discussion of transitioning or sunsetting the PSTN. So when I talk about transition, that's what I'm referring to. And we'll have more detail when Adam reports later. The nice thing was the consumer market spoke about the general consumer market has already begun the transition. There were specific figures mentioned, which I didn't reprint here, that were in the discussion. The number of PSTN-based voice service machines are on the decline. The number of wireless or cordless phones on the PSTN network were in decline. The number of fax machines are on the decline. However, there is a very large embedded base, so that needs to be, you know, we need to keep that in mind. There's quite a few pieces of equipment still out there. It was brought up, it's a great opportunity for the FCC and different providers to work in partnership on this transition, and that was really what was recommended. The other one, this one's kind of an interesting, may need to have a bucket of money set aside because there's always surprises. I'm not sure how big a bucket is or what that means, but you know, there are always surprises that do come up. And the other part, the FCC is doing its role. It was very well received that we put on this workshop because people felt it was a good first step to facilitate this transition. There's also going to be infrastructure issues. If we no longer have an PSTN and some of the related regulation, how do you handle attachments? How do you handle right-of-ways? All these things that are currently addressed within the policy and regulations that are tied to the PSTN sort of are up in the air until that's decided. And then there was this concern about consumers' networks and networking needs. It's really being pushed further out to the edge to the consumer, and there's concern, can consumers keep up with that pace in terms of managing their own networks? I think it's actually a good option for some providers to step in. Alarm and securities are already beginning the transition. Many of these companies have already moved to providing capability for wireless-only users or for IP network users, cable users, whatever. The concern there, again, there is a very large embedded base of equipment out there in the alarm industry. So some of that would have to be transitioned or maybe even incentivized. The bottom line that everybody really felt strong about, that the FCC really can play a key role in this transition by working with all these different groups. Education and communication are critical, and all the groups were very interested in being part of the transition. There was really not anybody saying, no, we want to hang on to the PSTN forever. And the last, at the end of it, there was a question, at the end of one of the panels, a question about, you know, which service, or what would you use to call 911? And everybody from all sides agreed they would use their cell phone. So it was kind of an interesting data point there. And it had to do with the mobility capability, and it's probably what you have on you when you're in an emergency situation. So again, thanks to the FCC staff and our speakers from that session.
Thanks, Russ. And we'll come back again and discuss those as a part of Adam and David's report. The minutes, we should ask the minutes to reflect that Russ is the only report who had a visual assist. as a part of it.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring up the title about.
So that was one of 2 workshops, and there was another one on the 14th, and David's going to lead that. Great.
Okay, so we had a second workshop on the telephone network transition was the title. This was organized also by the FCC staff. Lisa and Claude did a tremendous job, really, because on top of everything else, they were doing these 2 in 2 weeks. So it was a lot of work to put it together. It went very smoothly. We had a very good turnout, strong panels of academics. I'd say we're the primary group, some industry representatives, and then there was some overlap in both of those groups with folks that had previously been at the FCC and folks that had never been at the FCC. So it was, I think, a fairly good mixed group. The specific comments and recommendations, for the most part, were perhaps less detailed in terms of giving us some answers to some of the specific questions we asked, but I don't think that was actually a surprise to the folks that had organized it. I think we knew that this was really a jumpstart activity, and I think one of the most important outcomes of this workshop is we now have, I think, the brain trust of folks in academia and industry that work on policy issues thinking about this problem. And I expect they're going to go home, give assignments to their graduate students. We're going to see some nice outputs and nice recommendations coming back to the FCC in a thoughtful way over the coming months. So I've split the description of the workshop into 2 sections in terms of what we inferred as the output. And to keep this short, we really the members of the TAC that attended, we tried to sort of summarize what we thought we heard with apologies to any of the speakers and others. So this is going to necessarily have left off a lot of good points that were made and probably butchered some others. So we split that into 2 parts. One were the comments on the transition itself, and the others were sort of what the FCC should do about it. In the first category, you'll notice this first comment was, this was our inferring, various people quoted different numbers, but they were all around this 1/3 and 3x sort of numbers quoted here. And these are not, I want to say, not FCC numbers, not TAC numbers. These are numbers that were being quoted by various panelists as their estimates of what's going on. So this was just an affirmation that the transition is very real. And further, as you'll see in the second bullet, the consensus that the use of voice over analog and or TDM equipment is going away. And that's not, again, I think everybody around this table in the room here has heard this before, but just for people on the webcast to be clear, this is not that the TAC is making something go away. It's not that the FCC is making anything go away. It's not that the government's making anything go away. It's almost certainly not that your carrier is making something go away. It's just essentially people are voting with their feet and making economic and other decisions and disconnecting. I think there were various other comments here on the numbering plan, accessibility. I think you can all read the bullets, so if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them, but I think I'll move on to the comments that were made on the FCC's role, coming more from the policy side. One that we heard repeatedly was really around our communication and perhaps also how we think about this, which is that we should focus a lot more on the future and say more about what we're transitioning to. And people were much more interested in discussing that topic than what we're transitioning from. They understand the importance of working out how we manage the transition, but I think it's very important to lay out a vision of where we're going. A second point, and it really is a bullet with a number of key sub-bullets here, was that it would be important, and this is stated as the FCC should, I'm going to come back and comment on that in a moment, but that it's important to step back and identify the social goals and needs that got us to our current system of regulations. So instead of looking first at the regulations, back up from them, figure out what were the goals and needs, and then figure out which of those still apply and which of them do we want to sustain into the future, and how do we do that. The comment I want to make here is, although I think the panelists talked about this in terms of the FCC should do this, I'm actually hoping a lot of those panelists will go do it and come back and make thoughtful recommendations to the FCC on this topic. And then, again, I won't speak to all the sub-bullets. You can read them for yourselves, but I think there was a good, healthy disagreement on some topics and good consensus on others. Another topic or comment that we heard repeatedly during the panel was that the FCC should convene multi-stakeholder forums. And in fact, whether it's the FCC or the industry, I'm not sure people care that much, but there should be multi-stakeholder forums convened to essentially get as far as we can on a voluntary basis with the transition, with the view that then the FCC could act as a backstop. So where industry and the other stakeholders can't work it out amongst themselves, then the FCC should be prepared to step in. And I guess underlying that, there's an implication there that the FCC has to make sure that that process is happening and moving along on a timely basis. Within the sub-bullets there, one that came out a number of times was that just there's a lot of gritty details. And I think this came out in Russ's report as well. So somebody needs to sort of be managing the punch list and just sort of keeping track of all the different activities that need to be taken care of. In that case, it's much broader than the HDTV transition, for example. There's many, many different types of services affected, and somebody sort of needs to keep track of that, and it's probably therefore many different working groups or stakeholder forums for the different activities that are going to be involved. So there's a process to be managed here. Finally, there was discussion around what at the workshop was called a flash cut date, but it's essentially whether or not there was a need for a date certain. There were definitely a number of the panelists that favored that as a way to drive progress, specifically on the punch list items. What happens to fax, burglar alarms, fire alarms, etc., TTY. There was, however, I'd say also a view that we should be realistic that transitions take a long time, and we will probably be living with coexistence with some of these analog technologies for a fair amount of time to come.
Great, thank you, David. So, under the leadership of David and Adam, the working group on critical transitions has really move this issue to the forefront inside this building. And the inheritor of that is Dan Kirshner, who's now going to tell us, after all these things, let's see. David says it's about the gritty details. Russ says it's just a first step. David, tell us how you're going to do it.
I don't know overpromise here. Just uninheritor, but yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the PSTN transition and how the Commission is thinking about that. And I wanted to start out by noting something that David and Russ observed as well. This is not a TAC initiative or an industry initiative or an FCC initiative. This is something that is happening as consumers effectively vote in the choices that they make. And it's really been accelerating in the last 5 or 6 years. And basically the PSTN is in transition as more and more consumers each year decide to forego PSTN VIX voice in favor of alternative communications technologies. And so what the Commission really needs to think about is what are the policy and technical implications of that shift. So the TAC and the working group have done excellent work informing the FCC and PSTN transition, and the workshops were extremely helpful, and the presentations that they've done and will be doing again today have been very, very helpful. They've really defined this transition issue as a core concern for the Commission and really raised its profile. They've also recommended a time horizon. They've raised a series of key questions, and they've begun the process of providing recommendations, mostly process recommendations for how the FCC should begin to grapple with these issues. At the FCC, as Tom noted, we've taken this very seriously. We've committed personnel to the issue. We held the workshops with the assistance of the TAC. And we also are just aware of this issue in the context of ongoing actions, including rulemaking. The fact that this is happening is something that is in the back of our minds and informs a lot of what we are thinking about and dealing with here. As we consider the concrete next steps, I think there's really three things we need to understand. One is we need to have a very clear sense of the state of the market and how it is shifting and sort of the time frame of that shift. We also need to understand the policy implications of preserving or adding functionality in the replacement network. This shift presents a lot of opportunities for changes in functionality. We need to think of the policy implications of preserving current functionality and adding functionality, and also the technical challenges of those changes. As we think about the market analysis, I wanted to break that up into sort of three categories. One is the PSTN and fixed voice projections. So what is happening to fixed voice and what in general, which would include things like managed VoIP, and what is happening to the PSTN in particular. So what will fixed voice demand be in the next few years generally, and how much of that demand will be served by the PSTN? What is the economic significance of the market loss? What is the feasibility and cost of continuing PSTN service? Fixed costs versus variable costs. How does the PSTN market loss impact the infrastructure, separate copper loops, DSL, voice service? And then the other question is really, what is the makeup of replacement technologies? We hear a lot about cord cutting, the percentage of people that no longer have fixed voice. Are those people using alternative services like over-the-top internet services? What demand is sort of being made up by managed VoIP services? What is just going entirely to wireless? So we want a sense of really what is the makeup of how exactly are consumers voting. Some of the key challenges that are created by the transition away from the legacy PSTN include promoting competition. How do we make sure that this remains a very competitive space? How do we deal with universal service issues, carrier of last resort obligations, which have generally been structured around the PSTN? What about services that depend upon the PSTN, alarm systems, fax machines, things that right now are dependent upon the PSTN? And how do we maintain the reliability, continuity, and accessibility that have really been the hallmark of the PSTN? As we transition away from the legacy PSTN, we have to analyze that shift from the perspective of various stakeholders, and that includes ILECs, CLECs, consumers, local government, emergency responders, et cetera. So here is a not intended to be exclusive list or a complete list of capabilities of the PSTN replacement network and how we're beginning to think about what functionality should and will be preserved and added. One thing that the PSTN has actually gotten a lot of people are very positive about is the resiliency and reliability of the PSTN. It generally works very, very well. It works even in power outage situations. How does that resiliency and reliability maintained in the shift to a different infrastructure? Another question is advanced communications services. The shift away from the PSTN presents opportunities for much more sort of data-rich services, HD voice, video conferencing, various text services, et cetera. Where do those fit into the replacement network? Is there some kind of understanding of basic service that needs to evolve and not necessarily be centered around narrowband voice? Accessibility issues. So we heard about the decline of T2Y usage. What's going to replace it? Video chats and things like that. How do we address this accessibility issues in the replacement network? 911 issues. CLIA and Homeland Security, so it's wiretapping, issues like that, privacy and personal security, and also support for existing non-voice technologies that rely upon the PSTN, the so-called corner cases, fax machines, alarm systems. One sort of key element, technical element to think about is interconnection and interfaces. So, what are the network interfaces infrastructure for the PSTN replacement network? The end user to the network, what replaces RJ11? Is going to be, how are people going to actually connect to this network? Network to network interconnection issues, services interconnection issues, so the services that run on top of the network. There are interconnection issues there. Numbering, and these issues, the interconnection issues, are both physical interface issues and also protocol issues. So another thing that we need to really think about and try to understand is the timing of the transition. And this is more what is the pace of this? Is this sort of a punctuated equilibrium? Is there going to be a period, a sort of tipping point when there's a real rapid shift? So is it cutover or gradual displacement? As this displacement continues to occur, how do we ensure continuity of service? And to what extent are different parts of the transition interdependent? And then sort of a final set of issues. Again, I mentioned earlier, universal service, the carrier of last resort, eligible telecommunications carrier. How does universal service look in the context of the replacement network? Again, competition, consumer education and outreach. How aware are people of this shift? Are people who are signing up for managed VoIP, for example, from the cable companies, are they even aware that they're using a different technology? How do we inform consumers? How do we make sure that we preserve critical services? The regulatory review is going to be a major process for this commission, really looking at the scope of the interconnected regulations that address PSTN and try to think about how those regulations fit into this shifting world, and how do we maintain quality of service. So a little bit about sort of working with the TAC. So as we navigate these issues, we are really going to depend upon the TAC to provide us with technical advice and to inform our analysis of policy issues. These are incredibly complicated technical issues, and we really are going to rely on your expertise in helping us really figure these things out. So we're in the process right now of formulating a series of technical questions that we want to present to the TAC, difficult issues that we really would like guidance and information in helping us resolve. And I think we're starting with sort of 4 broad categories of the kind of technical guidance that we're going to seek. Interconnection, robustness, transition of PSTN non-voice technologies, and numbering. And I wanted to sort of set forth some kind of example questions, the kinds of questions that we're going to be asking of you guys. So interconnection is a very complicated issue. And one question is, how does IP interconnection differ from TDM interconnection, including the economic and technical principles determining the efficient number and points of interconnection? Another question is, what technical standards are necessary for IP interconnection of voice in order to ensure quality and reliability, including call completion, which is a big issue in VoIP, and security, caller ID trustability? What is the feasibility of technical standards for interconnection of services beyond basic voice? HD voice, video conferencing, text. What is the feasibility of those standards? What would they look like? In the robustness category, example question would be, what are current best practices for power outage robustness for IP-based networks, and have these been widely implemented? So local battery backups, should they back up the full scope of sort of internet access? Should they only be backing up, part of that voice service, for example? How do we make sure right now the PSTN can often operate in several days of battery backup? That's not necessarily true of replacement networks. Transition of PSTN non-voice technologies. So what are the major non-voice TDM-based technologies, and what are the successor technologies in IP-based networks? Again, this is the examples of fax machines, alarm systems, things right now that are not voice, but that really depend upon the PSTN. And then numbering is a big issue. So what are the technical challenges and advantages in improving the numbering system as we shift to new network regime? Obviously, there are different opportunities that can be taken advantage of with different numbering system or alterations to the numbering system, and we need to really think about those issues. So that's really just a sort of set of example questions and a list of the kind of issues that we're really focused on addressing as we move forward and really think about the PSTN transition.
That's all, huh?
That's it.
Okay. Nothing else to worry about. Dan, give us a feel for your, I don't know if it's a roadmap or a timeline or what it is, but how do you envision the process? We've got, it's a multi-year exercise here. Mm-hmm. We're not even at day 0 yet in the process. How do you envision it going forward? Is the first step of the commission to lay out a timeline into which the kinds of things that you were asking the TAC to do fit? I mean, what's your thought process in managing this?
Well, I think, one thing that we really want to start with is making sure that we have the information we need. If we're going to set some sort of timeline, what that timeline should look like, whether there should be a timeline with as we discussed, there was a robust discussion of whether there should be a target date or things like that. Those are things we really need to have more information before we're able to
I really
make.
mean less that it's this date out here, but this has to follow this, which has to follow this, which, that kind of a PERT chart almost.
So I think
or a Gantt chart.
Yes, there's a question?
Okay, we'll come,
I'm willing to wait till we get to the appropriate point, but I want to get in the queue.
I'm getting you. You'll get there.
Okay. So I think as I said, I think the first step is an information gathering. The commission has been, regulating in areas that, of course, touch upon these kinds of concerns. For example, when it comes to VoIP services and things like that. We have an FMPRM out now on interconnection. So, there are sort of ongoing issues that arise that touch upon and relate to this transition that we will be dealing with in real time as we sort of confront issues. But when it comes, I think what we really want to do is take the opportunity to really take a step back and try to think about this holistically. And I think that's really what the TAC has encouraged us to do. And so the first step in that process is, as these various paths are continuing, is really take a step back and get a very clear sense of what's going on right now out there, what's going on in the market, where are people moving. If people are moving to wireless exclusively in a large percent of the population in a way where they don't even have access to fixed broadband, obviously that's going to implicate a lot of our decision making. So we want to get a very clear sense about, first of all, what exactly is going on out there. Then we want to get a very clear sense about what aspects of the PSTN we really think are necessary to preserve. And then the question is going to be, how do we go about preserving that? Is that going to be, we're going to have industry groups? Is the industry going to step forward and come up with sort of voluntary issues? Are we going to think about this in a regulatory context? So we have to really, first we want to identify what the goals should be in preserving functionality. And then we want to think about the process for that, for actually doing that.
Okay, we will cue Mr. Cerf here, but as Vin and Greg have done, the convention of putting your card up, I'll call it Vin.
So I have a discomfort with the way in which you were posing questions to Dan, and the reason is that I don't think this is a serial transition. This is a global phenomenon. This is something which is happening in various and sundry places at different speeds with different infrastructure. So we are going to deal with a very diverse and complex environment while this process is going on. Second, don't count out broadband facilities, fixed broadband facilities. They're important right now, certainly here in the U.S., and they are bearers of almost anything, particularly those things that are carried over internet, since they're agnostic for all practical purposes. So what I think we're going to have to sort our way through is, first of all, I like Dan's point about assessing what's going on, what kinds of things are happening. I also think that the focus on voice may be it may lead us in the wrong direction. My belief, maybe my credo, is that voice is not at the core. It might be at the core of people's business models, but it is not at the core of communications anymore. Carrying things in packet form. Is this working okay? I can't quite tell because my hearing aids are doing an AGC, and so I can't tell if it's working.
It is.
It's okay. Thank you. So I'm concerned that that we recognize that voice communication is becoming almost a casual thing. And it's an incidental thing in many cases. So when people are playing video games and things like that, they're talking. But they didn't make a phone call. When people are texting at each other and then they decide they want a video call or something like that, it's a click of the button and bang, you're on video. The WebExes and the GoToMeetings and all these other things of the world are starting to show up. So this is a non-trivial exercise. I don't think that it is an exercise that's even as simple as the digital TV exercise was. That was already pretty hairy. But this one is much more complex because the rate of change and the technologies that are available are not uniformly advancing everywhere. So I won't go on and on, but I really think this is going to take some careful thought, and that it is not going to be something that you can play a top-down transition sunsetting game. This is going to have to be something where we engage on how to cope with the diversity of the system and see how you maintain functionality as this whole process unfolds.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points. And one of the sort of catchphrases we've heard a lot is, voice is just another app. I mean, that's really a question that we need to think about. And I hope it was clear in sort of laying out that list of things. It wasn't that, oh, we're going to move down this list. It was really, this is just sort of a demonstration of the complexity of issues that are here. When you think about, accessibility, for example, you start out with the PSTN, it carries voice, but then, that was used to carry text through TTY and things like that. And so already the PSTN, we talk about fax machines, alarm, already the PSTN is used for many things that are non-voice. And we want to think about, which parts of those are important to preserve. And what is, as we think about sort of these alternative technologies, how do we need to be thinking about, is there some sort of basic core set of services, for example, that we should be thinking about, in terms of universality, accessibility? Is it, particular, should we start with voice? I mean, this is really a sort of larger thinking exercise initially.
Mr. Chairman, just one small observation. We use the term in those slides, replacement network. May I suggest to you that that is actually a mistake? Yes. That we should not imagine that there is a replacement network.
Okay.
They're very dynamic.
Successor network, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go Greg, Tom, Kevin, Russ, in that order.
Dan, first of all, very comprehensive list, and you've absorbed so much of what we talk about week after week. But and I even heard you mention the one thing that concerns me right now, and that's education of the consumer.
Yeah.
But we talk about these things like this is all going to happen in the future, and it's actually happening now. And that's the biggest concern that I have in two ways. One is there are a number of people, and it's growing, that have, instead of moving away from the PSTN with their feet, they're moving away with their pocketbooks. And they're unknowingly choosing methods of communication that if they're sitting and talking and they have to dial 911, they won't be connected. Particularly the over-the-top systems don't connect. And people don't know that, or a lot of them don't. And that's certainly something that they should be informed of now, not in the future when changes happen. Furthermore, if I'll just give you I did a study of my sample of three, my three kids. All three of them have, quote, cut the cord. And I don't believe the statistics on cutting the cord. If cutting the cord means going to cellular, all three of my kids have cut the cord in that they live in apartments without a PSTN. But I made sure, especially with one of them who keeps losing his phone, that he have an alternate means of communication so we can contact them, and that's usually something like an over-the-top provider. And I doubt, and in our committee discussions we've discussed about reliability and how in the future reliability will require redundancy. You'll need more than one mode of communication to really have the reliability that you get today with the PSTN. And for them, it's an internet connection and of different types and a cell phone. But these kind of things probably should start to be educated. We should be educating people about this now and not sometime in the future.
Tom?
Like others on the task force, I'm delighted that the FCC is giving this matter the attention that you are, apparently. But I'd urge you to think of a couple of things. One, with all respect to Tom Wheeler, this isn't day 0 or day 1. We're well into the transition from the PSTN. It's a transition that consumers have decided to make on their own. Do a simple thought experiment. If you had to do away with either mobile 911 calling or fixed line 911 calling, and you had no choice, which one would go away? It's really a pretty simple answer. So the PSTN is, one, already inadequate for our total communication needs, and those who are served only by the PSTN are served with inadequate service and have inadequate choices. Secondly, the transition isn't a nice voluntary thing like the transition to digital television. We can't decide not to have this transition. We can't even decide to postpone the transition. It's like postponing the sun going down. What we need to do is measure when the sun's going to go down and make sure we're prepared for the darkness. And the darkness will actually be more light. We can have a better network in the future, so I don't mean to sound like all doom and gloom, but we shouldn't pretend that we can slow down the pace of this transition. We may be able to accelerate it if it's helpful to accelerate it, but we can't stop it. And we can't stop the economic collapse of the PSTN long before the last user decides to abandon it. And so that's something that we're going to have to deal with. So as you ask us in the TAC your technical questions, I'd urge you, as difficult as it is, as politically fraught as it is, to set a nominal end date by which we believe the PSTN sun will set, because our answers only make sense in the context of a date certain. The technical answers for 2018 are different than the technical answers for 2028. So if we're going to be able to work with you, and I know we all want to, then we're going to need to face up to the fact that that PSTN sun is setting, that we can't slow it down, and that we need to deal with that reality. Thank you again for what you're doing.
Kevin.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of trapped in the language we use, and I think in thinking of this as a transition from the PSTN, we've already kind of got it wrong, in that that's a description of a set of steps that are going to occur from where we are to where we're going. I think you were much closer to it when, in passing, you made a comment, which I think is exactly where we really need to be focusing on, saying what services define sort of the U.S. policy on communications for the citizenry. Because if we conceptualize this in terms of steps from where we are, we're just going to miss. I mean, we're going to miss because of all the things that are already happening. I just think a much more useful place to start the policy discussion, because we know what's happening in the technology side, and it's, as everybody is pointing out, it's happening on its own. You ain't going to stop it. It's going to go where it goes. But where the FCC, I think, and the larger policy community has a real requirement to act, in some sense, is to define what do we mean by our expectations of given communication capability in the United States circa pick a favorite date, without reference to the PSTN. Whether it comes from some vestige of the PSTN or from something else isn't the issue. When people say things like, well, voice is just an app, they're right, it is just an app. The point is, I think we have to go and figure out what are the services that as a society we want to define as existing, and how they are going to be made available, at what level of subsidy or support. What are those things that have to happen, without worrying about the underlying technology at all, and then figure out, okay, how do we provide those things? The transition in some sense is going to take care of itself if you understand where you're going. And I don't mean to be flip about that. There's obviously a lot of work to do along the way, and there's that last person who still wants to use their PSTN connection when the entire cost of it is now theirs to bear. But there are a lot of economic forces that are going to make that stuff happen. What isn't going to happen just kind of automatically is an honest-to-God discussion of what are the services that we think are important to an informed communicating populace. Is it just voice? I mean, the telephone system as it existed was much more about, in some sense, the societal impact of creating a communications capability across the United States. All right, what is that in the next go-around here? And if we understand that, then I think we'll be in a much better position to understand things like, is, you know, some advanced form of text messaging a part of what we expect everybody to have? Well, based on watching kids today, you know, you might say, hey, that may be more important than voice. Maybe the thing that's much more important is, you know, video messaging with 911 capability. That would be a, you know, but the only way you're going to get there is if we as a community phrase the question in terms not of, you know, how are we navigating from where we are, but rather, hey, it's an open field. Let's put a stake down on where we think we're going to be as, you know, in terms of policy, and then we can figure out the path. Or to some degree, the path will kind of almost manifest itself. So I think people are already thinking those kinds of things, but I think the language we use when we say, you know, how do we transition from the PSTN or something, is all about looking back, you know, at this existing structure and saying, well, what do we do with that structure? I don't care what we do with that structure. What I care about is, what do we mean by communications for Americans, you know, in 2020 or in 2025 or whenever, you know, you want to pick. So.
Well, I mean, I think that's an excellent series of points. One thing I wanted to say is, you know, the PSTN was the only network for point-to-point communication. So all the policies and industry standards and everything, you know, for all these issues was all centered around that one network. And I think what you're responding to, and one of the issues that we're really trying to grapple with, is the fact that there's been a splintering in terms of how people communicate, and different people are using different technologies, and, you know, and so the question is, what are the sort of the policies and issues surrounding the PSTN that need to move forward into this new sort of splintered world? And, you know, how is the commission, you know, going to play a role in sort of making sure that happens?
Yeah, I think there's a huge role for the commission and for organizations like bodies like the TAC to play in trying to set that vision out. I just think until we have that vision, it's going to be very, very difficult to have a debate about, you know, is the current phone numbering system interesting or not? Well, you know, anybody who uses Skype is using something completely different for their naming to endpoint location mechanism. Do we all think we'll still be using phone numbers in 2020? Yeah, some of us will. But there'll probably be a lot of different ways to get to that same endpoint. So that, you know, it's not about that. It's about what are the services.
Well, this is a big issue, and a lot of people here will be working on this. And I wanted to also mention Henning, who was just named the CTO coming in. He's going to be very involved in these issues and has been thinking a lot about these issues for a long time.
So Kevin has moved us from the technological orientation to the existential.
Hey, wait a second, I'm a geek.
Let's go. Russ, Shahid, Jesse, Dan. Geez, this is getting in line, guys. Okay, let's go. Exactly. Let's go with Russ, Shahid, Jesse, then we'll come back over here, guys.
So just a couple quick points in the effort of time here. Thanks for putting together a list, which I think is a good start. I think we can put some more items on that list for you. The other piece, I have to agree, this train has left the station. When you have 30% of the people that have quote-unquote cut the cord, it's already moving. So I agree with the perspective. We're probably behind the curve on that. The other thing I'd really like us to start to look at is, I think the term cutting the cord is inaccurate. And we talked about this in the workshop as well as in our working group. Many people are going to, as Vint pointed out, going to continue with a wired, or whatever you want to call it, a hardwired infrastructure for broadband access. When people cut the cord, what they're really cutting is they're cutting the pots. And what they're keeping is the underlying or the new broadband service to connect to multiple other services and capabilities. And whether that's wired or wireless or Wi-Fi, it's typically, you're still going to have this hardwired. So when we talk about sunset, we're not talking about sunsetting, so to speak, the cord. The cord needs to be redefined, I think.
Shahid.
Thanks, Tom. First, I just want to say that the transition is happening by itself organically. Whether we like it or not, there's a decline in PSTN. And so I think it's dangerous to compare transitions such as IPv6 or DTV, because there isn't a tangible breaking point. Like, we're not running out of IPv4 addresses. I think my recommendation here would be to let the market forces lead us to the PSTN inevitable end. To that end, we just want to make sure that this train is not a runaway train, and that we manage the risk associated with people moving to replacement and substitute technologies to ensure that they are also getting the same level of services, whether it's emergency, fax, alarms, whatever else. And so I think there's a role for FCC there to de-risk this decline.
Jesse?
Thanks, Tom. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. No, thanks, Tom. No, my question, Dan, was when I listened to you talk through several of the items, I noticed some of the international peering point issues, because we're going to have developing countries that are not going to move at the pace that America is moving in terms of a transition, and we'll have other developing countries that are. How are we dealing with that, or is that something that you guys are going to include in your study, at least in your work?
I think it's something we should include.
Dan, Marvin?
Sorry. So at the risk of going back into existential angst here, I do think the language does shape the way we think about this. You know, post-PSTN is kind of like talking about horseless carriage in some sense. And in the spirit maybe of what Kevin was saying, you know, I think there is an opportunity to think more expansively about the kind of services that we want to deliver and what the technology could enable. And I'll just draw an analog of another entity that's struggling with the technology transition, and that's the U.S. Postal Service. And it was another example of a point-to-point communication system that in many ways has been obviated by other technologies, and it's embroiled in a lot of complex politics as well as the economic model that constrains some of the things it can do. And I think it's really important that we not fall into that kind of trap, that we think about what is it we really want a communication system in the 21st century to be, and not sort of latch onto how do we transition, because I think that will pull us back. And to a point someone else made, I'm not so much worried, maybe as Jesse, about us, you know, the rest of the world catching up with us. I'm as worried about the fact that other parts of the world are going to pass us in this space because they may not bring quite so many constraints to the table.
No. I mean, you know, one of the interesting things that both you and Kevin are spot on, and your horseless carriage is a great metaphor. The reality that this body has to deal with, however, is that they have a set of laws that are based upon, and precedent and court decisions that are based upon that old thing that we don't want to talk about anymore. And so the process of getting out of that while the market forces, Shahid, to your point, are moving forward on their own, I mean, that's a high wire act. Okay. Marvin?
Yeah.
Some of the transition away from the PSTN we've been saying is towards VoIP, but I want to argue that there are actually very few VoIP users. Some businesses have VoIP handsets on their desk, but most residential users have an analog telephone. And as far as they're concerned, it's exactly the same as the service they had before. There's no additional functionality provided by that instrument. And there's a conversion. Now, the conversion may happen at a network interface near the NID. It may happen at a remote terminal. It may happen at the line side of a switch. But as far as the user is concerned, he's still getting analog service. And a lot of the transition that we're talking about won't happen until the handset is new technology. And that requires inside the house networking, which is a barrier, I think, in a lot of residences. So we shouldn't overestimate the extent to which we've moved to VoIP. I'm looking at the FCC's report on the percentage of subscribers using VoIP, but I claim that most of them aren't.
Well, I would disagree with you, at least. I mean, I know I'm the rookie in the room, but I mean, you guys are talking about the difference between a narrowband network and a broadband network. I mean, the PSTN is a narrowband network, and there are carriers around the world that are building broadband networks to carry lots of different services, and I'm struggling with the FCC's role in defining what services what carriers are going to deliver. I mean, every carrier is going to define what services they want to deploy based on their own competitive economics. And for us to sit here and try to decide what Verizon services are going to roll out versus what services some CLEC, I'm struggling with. You know, the net of this is the elephant in the room, and that's the financial and the economics around universal service funds and reciprocal comp that is keeping, you know, the FCC and others very involved. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we've already deployed over 1,000 voice over IP soft switches just in the U.S. that are delivering voice services as an application over a broadband infrastructure. If you look at what Verizon is doing with Fios, for example, they're delivering broadband services using our switches to deliver voice as one of 3 different service types that are going to the home. And whether consumers, which everyone continues to talk about, continue to use voice as a fixed broadband service or not, there's still a huge reliance upon voice services for enterprise and for government. And I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. And we spend all day. We got 2,500 employees that wake up every day focused on voice as one of the services with both enterprise, government, and consumers. And while I do agree that consumers are choosing to move to alternative means of communication, I don't see it moving as fast as the room would like to think it is. So I'm struggling because the PSTN, in our view, is a narrowband service that is being replaced by broadband services, and that's ultimately what we should be focused on.
So, first of all, I do agree that we are seeing a transition into broadband facilities. With regard to what Marvin said, let me argue that there are some people who end up using both, or, you know, all of these things. I mean, I have analog phones at home, I have mobile phones at home, I use Skype, I use Google Talk. I use all these things, and I think it's very important for us not to fall into the trap of imagining that we are going to go from we all do it this way to we all do it that way. It isn't going to happen that way. It's going to be we do a bunch of different things, and some of them will eventually peter out. I think the narrowband network is less interesting as the broadband network evolves and penetrates. But I think that we're, like the point that was made earlier, I think by Russ, we can't imagine that it's all going to be radio-based. What will happen is eventually radio comes to Earth, and we have to have a broadband underlying terrestrial network in order to support it. So I really don't think that, that this is going to be a process of literally going from A to B. This is really going to be a process of going from A, the narrowband choice of the past, to B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and so on. And it's not going to happen at the same pace. I've already made the point, so I'll stop there.
Okay, well, I think that...
One last comment. I mean, what role did the FCC have when we saw technologies like X.25 and frame relay and ATM evolve as a technology to IP and others? I mean, I think that in the end, the technology is going to take its own course. And as many people in this room have stated, I mean, broadband is well on its way, and new means of delivering voice, which everyone is focused on, is evolving. And that technology is going to evolve. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot longer than everybody thinks. It's taken 75 years to build the PSTN as it is today. It's not going to evolve in 5 years. It's not going to evolve in 10 years. It's going to take a lot longer than everybody thinks. And I think that this requires a lot more of attention than one thinks.
I'm sorry, Tom, just one other observation. The point about services that Kevin makes, I think, is critical. The other point I think we should make is interfaces, because a lot of equipment could be fooled into thinking it's still operating the old way when it's actually being supported a new way. And so standards, interfaces, and services are the areas that I believe are the most important to preserve in order to make things backward compatible and interoperable. But it doesn't have to be that you preserve the entire narrowband network in order to serve the narrowband equipment that might still be legacy.
Okay, this has been a great, Adam and David, I think maybe we have just preempted a lot of the discussion after your report, but we're still going to do your report. And exactly. But
the minutes.
The chairman ought to be coming momentarily. I'm going to switch the order of discussion here for a second and ask Charlotte if she would jump in on IPv6. Because I think there's some relevance. We've just been comparing to the IPv4, IPv6 transition, but also I think Charlotte's got a defined set of things that she can go through in a relatively terse amount of time. So, Charlotte, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. First of all, I'd also like to thank Walter for being of extreme help to us and helping us to work through some items. But if you actually turn, it's towards the back of the page, probably back of the pack, probably 6 view graphs in. I wanted to talk through some of the actions that we have performed, which is really, we have recommended an ongoing government industry working group to oversee the IPv6 transition. We have recommended that IPv6 issues be coordinated among relevant government agencies, and there's been a number of outreaches to specific agencies such as NTIA and OSTP. I would also say that we're very excited about the fact that there's a workshop being organized. Unfortunately, we could not complete it in December. It's scheduled for mid-February with the NTIA on IPv6, and they'll be covering things such as, learnings from IPv6 Day, some policy issues, as well as some benchmarking and also some deployment challenges relative to IPv6 and what it means to really be IPv6 enabled. We have developed a benchmarking document that we did receive some input from the TAC. There's some other inputs that have come in as well in the last couple of days. We think this is going to be a living document. It will be something that we work with the NTIA on a going forward basis. And clearly one of the big wins is that this EA has established a working group, and because we believe that devices are going to be one of the items that's going to be the long pull in the tent. So if you turn to the next page, government industry work group. Ongoing, we do believe that there needs to be the ongoing work group, as I said, because this is not going to be a simple transition. It's going to be a multi-year, maybe even a decade transition. The NTIA, FCC, and key industry sectors need to be represented, and again, we are working with NTIA. The working group provided the initial benchmarking document to monitor IPv6 progress, and we also believe that our progress should be measured against other global entities. Next page, IPv6 governmental coordination. One of the conversations we had with the group was that it's not necessarily totally clear what all the different roles are of the different agencies relative to IPv6 evolution, and that we recommended that the government agencies coordinate the IPv6 activities, make sure that people understand what each agency is accountable for, and that the government acts with a unified voice to work with the industry. There's a lot of opportunities for sharing of experiences and information across the various agencies, we believe. And, again, I think that acting on some of the recommendations, Walter was very helpful in arranging some FCC, NTIA meetings to discuss roles and responsibilities. The IPv6 workshop is an outgrowth of this, but we really believe that as one of the outcomes that should occur is a very clear message to industry about what the various roles of the various governmental organizations are. And as I said, we've been working with a number of different groups within the government and having a lot of discussion with them. Government industry work group, we do believe that there needs to be a ongoing work group established to oversee the multi-year transition to IPv6. Let's see, am I going the right way here? No. Oh, I'm sorry, workshop on IPv6. Like I said, it's scheduled for mid-February. Dialogue on key IPv6 issues, current experience, policy issues, benchmarking strategies. Government and industry participants, we're in the process of finalizing a number of the moderators as well as the participants associated with that. And again, we believe that there should be a formal communication on the outcome of the workshop, and then basically some next steps associated with it. Benchmarking, as I said, we established the benchmarking document for monitoring IPv6. This is basically a work in progress. We believe that as more people get involved in this activity, that it will be modified over time. But we do believe it needs to include, you know, a number of sectors, including applications, consumer devices, network services, content providers. We believe that most data should be available, and this information should be shared with multiple agencies and organizations. We do believe that there needs to be a consensus associated with the benchmarking approach. It's not just that our document is the document that should move forward, but we need to get more people engaged with it. We have been sharing it with a number of government folks, and some of them have provided us some input from their perspective. And we need to ensure that we evolve the benchmarking approach as sees fit as we get further into the process. And again, as I said, you know, we do believe that we need to ensure that we are measuring ourselves against you know, global progress as well, and ensure that the U.S. Remains competitive. IPv6 sector groups, you know, again, we believe that there should be more working groups. We're very pleased that CEA has taken this as a significant step in creating their working group, and understanding from them status, timelines, issues, and strategies. Recommended that key sectors establish these groups and to coordinate activities and monitor how each sector is doing. And again, can't give enough praise to CEA. And lastly, in summary, the IPv6 transition, we believe, is absolutely critical to the future health of the U.S. Internet. And as the first group started, I mean, very clearly, if you're going to have more capabilities out there, you're going to need more addresses to support those capabilities, and companies are going to need them to continue their growth. But we also understand that this transition brings challenges and a range of issues. Many of us have been working those challenges and issues for the last 6-10 years. We strongly believe and recommend that this challenge be raised to a national level of awareness and monitored during this transition phase, which, as I said, is going to be multi-year, and that the FCC should be provided with regular assessments on status and issues regarding IPv6 evolution to the TAC body. And we thought that it made sense to basically do bi-yearly updates on the progress, so that, you know, people on the TAC can understand exactly what the newest challenges and opportunities are. Tom?
Charlotte, thank you. You were, you know, you hit the target. Perfect
Thank
timing.
you.
Thank you. But I know that Vint, a man who has no opinions on this topic, okay? The chairman needs to hear what you have to say. The chairman needs to hear what you have to say.
I have 4 points. First of all,
could you do it as quickly as Charlotte?
I got my pen out. I got my pen out.
One, this is not a transition. This is an introduction of an additional addressing capability into the Internet. Do not mistake that for a transition. This is additional capability. Second, there is a very real threat that if we don't get this done promptly, we're going to end up in a cascading NAT environment, which is incredibly bad from every dimension you can think of. I think NIST should be involved, if it is not, in the measurement practices, and also Van Rokel over at OMB, because for government policy on IT-related things, use his leverage.
Great work. Okay. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us.
That is a challenge to brevity that I don't think I'll be able to match, although I will be brief. I will be brief. I'm just going to be candid with you about why I'm going to be brief. It turns out that there were fewer people than expected who were qualified to participate in the national menorah lighting ceremony today, who are also senior officials in government, and they kind of scanned around and they said, "You." So this is some kind of job. So that is where I'm supposed to be very no. My physical presence and actual actual fire is required. So think of me as you continue to do the country's work here at the FCC.
Yeah, right.
Maybe next year we'll just do it here. That seems to be where things are going. So a few things briefly. One, thank you. Thank you to each of the members of this group. It's been just an excellent year in the input that the TAC has made to our work. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your lives. We assembled a group of people who really do have other things to do. So it means a lot that you've decided to spend this time. Some of you have spent a ton of time on this, and it's really appreciated. And we recognize in all our internal meetings on these topics that the only appropriate way to honor the work that you're doing is to take it very seriously and to incorporate it into the work of the Commission, which we're doing. I want to thank the working group leaders, Adam Drobot, David Tenenhouse, Charlotte Field, Dennis Roberson, Dick Lynch. All of you, each of you took responsibility for important areas. I want to thank my friend Tom Wheeler for taking this on, for leading this, for basically taking responsibility for all the different aspects of it. At the same time, Tom, as you've empowered this group and you've empowered FCC staff in ways that I know the staff really appreciates. And I want to thank all the staff who've been working on this. I'm glad you've had a chance to meet our newest, what's it called when you steal someone from somewhere else?
Theft. Cattle rustling. Hijacked it.
Meet Dan Kirshner, who was doing superstar work at the Justice Department and OLC, and we're just very, very lucky to have Dan here now. He has a long and deep interest in these issues, and it took 3 years, but I finally got Dan over here, and we're very glad you're working on this. I'm not going to repeat the things I've said to this group before. You all know that the charge that we gave this group was a real one. We wanted you really to develop ideas that we could move forward on, and you've done that over the last year. Moving forward on an executive order on federal rights-of-way to streamline rolling out broadband infrastructure, wired and wireless on federal property. I can't say that the EO is done, but I can tell you that as a result of the work that this committee pushed, it is being actively worked on. And we've taken something that was moribund, and I'm hopeful that we'll see something in the near future. I certainly hope so, and we continue to push based on the work that you've done. You've pushed to help us work on new metrics to measure broadband network quality. The recommendations have been incorporated in our broadband measurement program. This is the Sam Knows effort that some of you know about that actually have had a very good effect. I won't tell the whole story, maybe someone can tell it later, but we did our first round of measuring and publicly releasing data. And without getting into specific companies, I can tell you that it had the result that we hoped, which is that it created market-based incentives for people to say, hey, let's make sure we have competitive speeds and that our advertisements about speeds match what we're actually providing. And so simply by gathering the information and publicizing it, we've done a lot of good. I do want to thank all of the people from the ISPs who agreed to participate in this, which is a big deal because the only way we really could get accurate measurement was to be inside there with them. And so the ISPs all said, yeah, we'll do this, and we understand that some of us may look better or worse than others in doing it. As it turned out, almost everyone looked very good except for one company, but that's fine. That's fine too. But I really do appreciate it, and it's something that I hope we'll continue to see support from all the ISPs to allow this to continue, because I think it's a net good for everyone, and I think it helps both educate consumers, and it helps increase consumer confidence in the provision of broadband services. So I think it's been a success. And then third, this group is focused on new technologies for broadband deployment, which we've been working on in various proceedings, which I'm sure have been reviewed here. We have a lot more to do on this too, but it's an exciting area. From the start, at the very first meeting I was at, IPv6 was on the table, PSTN transition was on the table. I reserve the right to call it something else. And I know that as this group is thinking about the work for the next year, those are two big areas. I'm supportive of that because I think they're two incredibly important areas. And I think the one request that I'd make to the group is to continue your work to not let this become a debating society. And even in these issues, which I don't want to say they're longer term in nature because we have to do things on IPv6 sooner rather than later, but help us identify the actionable things that we can do to make progress. I think you'll find me, the staff, all of us be very receptive to, hey, listen, if you do this, good things will happen. You've done that so far. I'd like to see the same kind of thing in 2012. And I have one pledge to you for 2012, which I thought was going to be today, which is that I really want to spend time with this group and not just come in for a few minutes and speak and then leave. I thought that was going to be today, until they check my identity card, and so now I have to go. But thank you all, and so Tom, I'm committing to this publicly. I want to be an active part of the discussion the next time this group assembles and hear firsthand.
This is great.
And I look forward to that.
It's great. Mr.
Terrific.
Chairman, thank you for the opportunity you've given us all and for the way you have empowered us to actually go ahead and do something. We talked at the beginning. I made the judgment that this is the most effective TAC in the history of this long-serving institution. And it's because of two things. One, it's because of the high quality and dedication of people around the table. And two, it's because you empowered them to do something. So thank you very much, and happy holidays to you.
Thank you. Happy holidays, Happy New Year to everyone. We're not done yet, neither are you, Mr. Wheeler. So we will talk. And again, thank you all very, very much.
Okay. Adam and David, back to you all. Looks like 27, all right?
Not that many, but let me start off with the following. First of all, let me thank the staff of the FCC. First of all, sticking with this group and helping out, everything from workshops, being on phone calls, really making our job a lot lighter. And then I think we've had a number of stalwart participants in the group. And the first of those I'd like to recognize is Russ Gurek from Cisco. Really provided us, I would say, with two crucial things over the last 3 months. Access to WebEx, on which we conduct a lot of our business. And the other thing was really as a pusher to make sure we came to conclusion on the tasks in front of us. Okay, so let me start off with that. What I'd like to do is report the progress since the last TAC meeting. I think I took in a lot of the comments discussed earlier, and I got to say a lot of them were in fact covered during our deliberations, not all. And then I think I'm not going to be reporting on the workshops that happened earlier. What I would like to add is that besides the FCC workshops, there was a Wiley Ryan day-long meeting on the transition. NARUC had it as a topic at its annual meeting. The fire chiefs working with the fire codes have looked at it, and we also had a presentation to the National Academy of Sciences. So if I look at the participants in the group, they're on the view graph. I'm not going to go through them other than to say that this has been a team effort and a fairly broad-based participation with a few people who are really standouts. So let me report a little bit on progress. And the first thing is we have continued to hold a meeting at least weekly To tell the truth, quite a few additional calls over the weekends. We had the 2 workshops, a lot of feedback from that, and we have continued to refine what we mean by sunsetting the PSTN and what the key elements of the transition entail. I think at the last TAC meeting, we were asked to elucidate on a number of issues. I hope we can do that. I think we also set a number of work items for ourselves, which we haven't quite gotten to, so I think I'll mention those. And then finally, that we have refined the recommendations to the FCC. So let me start off with what we had previously recommended and add a little bit of color to it in view of the comments that were made. The first thing we had recommended is the orderly transition from the PSTN's role as a system of record for achieving national goals. And I think in light of Kevin's comment, the thing is to understand what those national goals are. I think we as a group were probably too small to answer that. I think we discussed it, but that's something serious yet to be done essentially. The second is identification of and migration to alternate mechanisms of achieving that subset of goals that remain important to our society and economy. Again, very high-level goals. They do require a lot more input and detail than you can do from part-timers participating in a working group. Okay, and then lastly, okay, as a qualifier, you know, when we looked at that term sunsetting, we did not mean the exclusion of any other technology. We did not mean to be trapped in any language on it, okay? Because in fact, a lot of that infrastructure may continue to have life in various ways, essentially. And the important thing is really the kind of services that you provide and the way that they drive the economy, okay? So, you know, when I look at that elucidation of what it is that we meant by the sunset, okay, I would say we spent a lot of time struggling with that issue. We had a number of cuts at definition of what we meant by the sunset, what we meant by the PSTN. We haven't distributed, but there's a fairly lengthy document that in fact defines the PSTN in technical terms. But what I really want to do is concentrate on 3 aspects of this, okay? And these are things that will not necessarily go away, but they will no longer constitute on their own what is a universal service. And that was one of the properties that the PSTN had. So the first aspect I would say is technical. It's a narrowband 4 kilohertz analog channel, okay? And basically, if you take a look at market forces, that is one of the items that seems to be going away. Very, very much as Charlie said it, okay? The second items are the protocols and mechanisms that support switch interconnect. These are the standards, the protocols themselves, the agreements between carriers, the economics that go with them, okay? And then lastly, there is a body of policies and regulations that is grounded in the assumption that there's a high degree of penetration of traditional circuit switch voice services throughout the country, which is no longer the case, in fact, okay? So if you look at it, there is a technical aspect of this, there is a protocol aspect to this, okay, and then there is the regulatory regime that we have in place. Okay, and what will be sunset in some sense, okay, are aspects of all of those 3, not all 3 as a whole, essentially, okay? And in the spirit of our discussions, I would say, yes, you can think of, you know, what it is that's going to go away. There's also very much the sense that's been expressed around the table that what is available is so much better and more powerful, which is why market forces are in fact making the PSTN go away. So in terms of our recommendations that we have refined, what we say is that the PSTN is a voice-centric network which no longer satisfies all of the interactive communication needs and demands of the citizens of the United States, that the transition, in fact, opens many opportunities for new and richer communication capabilities, and in fact, this is why I would say the marketplace is voting to go in that direction. It is something that's happening on its own, and it is the technical opinion of the Critical Transition Working Group that those market forces will lead to a significant loss of utilization by 2018, in preparation for which decisions need to be made today, and we consequently recommend the following actions. Okay? So we had 6 recommendations. The first, in fact, is to develop a detailed plan for an orderly transition for the current PSTN system of record to a service-rich network. It could be just rich services to begin with, for achieving key national goals. And I would say what those goals are is still needs to be identified and elucidated. And the plan should include the following: a public-private partnership with industry, providers, and relevant organizations and stakeholders. I think that was echoed in many of the workshops, essentially. And a coordination mechanism for the ongoing evolution of the network to rapidly incorporate new technologies and capabilities. We do not believe that a single network construct or a single technology is what the future is about. Okay, that it is in fact very multimodal in many, many ways. Our second recommendation was to establish a task force to conduct a thorough policy and regulatory analysis and to review it as it relates to the PSTN, which results in policies for new communication environments, and those are issues of interoperability, interconnect, numbering, reliability. Again, many of the comments that were made around the table and during the workshops. The third recommendation is to identify mechanisms and a migration plan for critical services, because if we heard anything over and over again, I would say the biggest angst was around critical services as people are fleeing the PSTN, and also access for the disabled. So therefore assuring critical services that need to be carried forward, and not only that they are carried forward, but that the public really understands the solutions. Our fourth recommendation was to commit to ensuring ongoing universal access to evolving communication services to enable all Americans to participate in the nation's economy. And that statement is not just built around voice, it is really built around the plethora of services that modern communications offer you. The fifth was to investigate the need for use of incentives to accelerate the transition to new services. And the sixth was to create a communications and outreach program to educate the public about the ongoing transition. And that is to provide the public with a vision of what we are transitioning to, again reflecting some of the comments around here, the new services and capabilities which can greatly exceed the current services of the PSTN. And lastly, to provide a roadmap and communicate the urgency to take action to avoid the loss of capability to support critical services. And I'd say lastly, we had a note at the end, because we wanted to say that we are not causing the sunset. It is happening by itself, okay? And whether that technology, the protocols or rules, what remains, okay, really ought to be the outcome of some kind of a really well thought through process, okay? So thank you. I think that was a brief summary of what we have.
The job that you and your team have done as a tour de force, that's a great half-dozen point summary. Dan, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again for that excellent work, and in particular for those 6 recommendations that we're going to take those under advisement, and we really appreciate them. Thank you.
Okay, and I got to tell you, thank you for the support and the great input from this body.
Well, you know, it's interesting how the discussion over the last year, in the last 4 meetings, has now narrowed down, thanks to what you all have done. Vint, do you have a comment?
4 things. First of all, make the damn slides readable on the screen. I don't want to see another dead tree required because we can't read the slides on the screen. I must have gotten up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. It's really spicy today. Second point, mobiles today are sporting multiple radios. Some of those radios do 802.11. The implication is that that device that you bring in the car, carry around in your purse, put on your hip, and bring home is capable of communicating over multiple underlying infrastructure, which means that the broadband facility does not necessarily compete with the mobile capability. They become supporting of that edge device. Third point, IP is already inside the PSTN. A number of carriers have abandoned their narrowband circuit switches and replaced them with IP packet switches. IP, fourth point, IP is outside the PSTN. It is inescapable, folks. IP is going to be the mechanism for most of the carriage end-to-end in the future.
Great. Adam, David, again, to the working group. Great job. Thank you to all of you. Dennis, you want to walk us through sharing, please?
I will be delighted. We can get the slides, and hopefully the slides will be readable to certain people in our membership, unnamed.
So make a point for the next meeting. Vint goes right there in front of the TV set.
Okay, the first few slides are actually slides just to reminder slides, and by now I've used them at each meeting, so you should all have them committed to memory. Our charter around sharing, and that was not just spectrum, although it was a key focus for us. Facilities were also part of our focus. This was the initial list of things, and this is somewhat important because we did deviate quite a bit from the list. I'll highlight the receiver standards, which got a lot of kickback on the first report of this meeting, but it was in fact where we started, and we're still working on what we do with receivers. Those standards is a word that we're no longer using. This is the team, and as has been suggested by each of the presenters, the great strength of the working group is the great strength of the TAC that Tom has highlighted, and that is that everyone has participated in a very significant way. And I was a little bit taken aback with the chairman's mention of this long-serving body when I recognized that I have served for the entirety of this long-serving body. It makes me feel quite old.
And do you agree with the chairman's observation?
I do agree with your observation. Yeah, your observation,
yes,
okay. and SCC. This has definitely been, having served through the entire duration, though I don't quite like the long-serving and the way that connotates personally, but nonetheless, it is definitely...
It must have been fascinating when Marconi first presented to the
We're going to have to get away from this very, very rapidly. But back to the point, this working group, as a working group, each individual has contributed in a significant way. And some started early, worked very hard at the front end, and others picked up later and contributed, but it's a tribute to the group, and a tribute to the FCC team who has not only supported but dramatically contributed to the group. So we greatly appreciate the group. The list of ideas and activities has compacted for us as it has with others and become more focused. Our initial ideas 1, 2, and 3, which were around spectrum efficiency, receiver efficiency, and taxonomy of spectrum ideas, collapsed down into a single focus around spectrum efficiency at the system level. We'll talk more about where we believe this needs to go in the future, but that has become our focus.
and a lot of activities have moved forward along that line. The progress, importantly, to talk about is built around the preparation of white papers. And each of the three activities that ultimately completed had a white paper associated with it, but the white paper for spectrum efficiency was the combination of focuses at the spectrum efficiency metric level, at the receiver standards, or really the focus on receivers, and the spectrum sharing taxonomy. So all three of those were combined into what's become a 34-page white paper that has been now distributed beyond the bounds of the TAC and is being used by others. And I highlight the last bullet point. This has been contributed to a really important PCAST working group that one of our members, Mark Gornberg, over in the corner, is leading on behalf of the president, actually, and the PCAST organization. But I think it's been a useful contribution that this body has made to a parallel body working on a focus in spectrum efficiency area. Our hope for the white paper is that this document will be a living document. We will declare the document version 1 at this point, and kudos to Rich Courier, who's been our lead in editing the document in the last half, and he complements Dale Hatfield, who was our initial editor for the document. But hopefully you have all had a chance to read the document. I'm sure it was great bedtime reading for you as it's continued to evolve, and we do appreciate the feedback that's come from many members of the TAC that have enhanced the value and utility of the document. From an economic impact standpoint, we do believe that this will have impact as we move forward, and that's really tied to the recommendations that we have. But we believe that by making the spectrum more efficient, we will enable many more services and enable the opportunity for many to contribute, and to contribute as well in enhanced capabilities for existing services beyond the new services that are created. From a recommendations standpoint, an actionable recommendations standpoint, we have 6 recommendations. The first is, and many of these really fall on the FCC to implement, but we believe that there's a need to recognize those who are making progress against the metrics that we've defined. The definition of metrics is one thing, and it's living in academia primarily these days. It's a wonderful thing for academics to create metrics and to create white papers. But the only real value is as these metrics take life and create action, and that action needs to be recognized. And so we need to find forums for recognition, and if I could skip down to bullet number 5, we also need to establish market-based incentives that will provide greater encouragement for progress against the metrics, and we do have the vision that the metrics would be an ever-rising level of standards that would be sought for and sought after by the various members and various contributing parts of the industry. A key part of the metrics and the global notion, especially as we move forward, is the notion of sharing. Our working group was established as a sharing working group, but sharing is critical, and we do believe that there is a requirement for a new licensing class or the modification of the way we license, so that the licensing itself has embedded in it the requirement for sharing as a fundamental element, as opposed to the licensing for geography for a certain portion of the spectrum that can be, in a sense, owned by any individual. The notion of ownership has to, said another way, has to move to a time-based ownership where at another time someone else can have full access to the spectrum. Finally, we need to look at the effectiveness and efficiency of the allocation itself. And as we make new allocations, look at how those allocations impact the overall efficiency of the utilization of spectrum. Again, we'll come back to that as something that more work is needed, but we think that's an important tenet that we need to move forward on. The last bullet really is a how we do these things, and in this case, NTIA and other government agencies will need to be involved in order to make progress in this area. Moving to the next item, the small cell deployment item. This one has already received a great deal of focus given Jesse's description of the session that was held here in this room a little earlier in the year. But this we believe to be a really important, very actionable item on the near term and with continuing efforts in the mid to longer term. The small cell forum we've already reviewed, so we'll not spend a lot of time on that, but I will jump to just the nice graphic, because this was commented upon earlier that none of the other groups had graphics, so I want to take issue with that courtesy of Jesse, we have a very nice graphic of our own. Thank you very much.
Let the record stand corrected.
But this is a view of what small cells are and may be useful for the documentation. The small cells are not theoretical, they're not off in the future, they are existent today, and what the group is really recommending is moving this forward in some very specific areas. To elaborate on that a bit further, today we do have the DAS systems, the distributed antenna systems that are very much deployed, that are out there and available from most of the wireless providers, and we see that as a continuing aspect of this domain of distribution. We've also all seen how Wi-Fi has taken on a very significant role in broadband offload for the major carriers, and we see that will continue to grow as well. But in the context, we do have two significant recommendations. Jesse's already given them. This elaborates on them. The actionable recommendations are, first, that the wireless providers themselves continue to drive deployment, but in this case, deployment not just of DAS and Wi-Fi offload, but also universal small cells that would allow existing cell bands to be more widely deployed in high teledensity areas within buildings. It would also be useful for other applications, and again, I refer to the comments Jesse made earlier, that there are a wide variety of applications that the availability of small cells could provide in healthcare or in other areas, telemetry applications within buildings and the like, in addition to this critical role of broadband offload. The other specific recommendation that we would put forth is that the 3550 to 3650 band that is on the NTIA track list, albeit with significant restrictions, the so-called 200-mile limitation, that band be made available as a dedicated band for the small cell application area. We believe that that's a very useful stance. We do believe that there will be a rollback on the 200-mile limitation that will make this spectrum more useful in a broader sense, and particularly for this kind of application in building where the premise of interference is dramatically reduced simply by the environment where the spectrum is being used within the buildings as opposed to outside. So those are the two key actionable recommendations around the small cell area. Moving to the fifth idea, the third of our points today, this is reducing application friction points. The notion is that there are, the notion up front was that there were significant friction points in terms of applications, particularly for commercial applications being deployed on cellular networks. And we felt that there up front that there were opportunities to dramatically enhance this circumstance. We in order to explore this, we did bring a lot of subject matter experts in from carriers, entrepreneurs working in this space, verticals and the like, received a lot of very, very useful input. In the end, drafted a white paper, which has also been circulated. There's a white paper, I should make mention, that is in the works around the small cell, which we didn't feel was quite ready to present to the group, but is something that will be coming early in the new year. But in this case, we did put forth a draft white paper in this area. The key findings out of this, just to summarize, we found that things have really moved, much as we talked about the PSTN, that we're now in an environment of mobile first from the application space, that as we move to mobile first, that wireless networks are, surprise, surprise, more complex than traditional fixed networks, and therefore this is a larger challenge, and it's very fast, very rapidly moving as we see transitions from second to third to fourth generation, with the fifth generation, if you will, already well on its way in the standards body, with LTE advanced out there in the wings. So we see the requirement for producing applications as being more challenging, but nonetheless it is the focus, it is where things are going. The diversity, rate of change, lack of common platform standards is a challenge to be dealt with, and lack of standards in certification as well. At the same time, we do see that there are a variety of building blocks that are being produced that are enabling entrepreneurs to be more effective in taking advantage of this rapidly moving environment, and that we will be able to see things move as these building blocks are normalized and standardized and made available on all platforms. The bottom line of all this is that we had hoped to find a smoking gun, if you will, a focused opportunity for immediate action that would enable us to generate short-term change, and we did not find it. So that's the downside. On the upside, however, we do think, and our actionable recommendations would suggest this, we do think that there is the opportunity to move things forward. We are looking for a developer conference to be held after the first of the year. We do, from a recommendation standpoint, believe that there's a need for more activity in this space, a community of interest developed, and we do think that by moving the carriers forward, carriers have much more going on in this space than was the belief of the group, and we all were educated as we came to understand that. But at the same time, there's a lot more communications that needs to be established, and a lot more harmonization between the carriers so that we can facilitate the development, particularly of commercial applications in this space. We need to commission a user-led focus on building blocks that will be enablers for moving things forward more rapidly, as I've referenced that as an activity. And we do need to continue to focus on the specific areas that might move forward, the critical infrastructures, utilities, public safety, healthcare, and the like, that we do believe could benefit in this area. Finally, the group spent some time thinking about the future, and our ideas for 2012, where we would like to see things go, is listed here, and it is, and it's not listed. Unfortunately, we actually had the wrong slide deck. It's very consistent with what you have, but there's an addition here, so I'll read these off, and it is in an alternative slide deck that's available on the computer up there. But our ideas for 2012, we do believe that we failed, to be quite honest. We didn't solve all of the problems in wireless this past year. As hard as we worked and as much as we achieved, we thought that we would accomplish all things, and Julie suggested that I share the mea culpa with you all.
That's Jesse's fault, isn't it?
Well, yeah, yes, in part, but it's the whole. We take the whole group, and as the leader of the group, I take the largest amount of responsibility personally for failing in this area of accomplishing our task of resolving all known problems in the area of sharing. But we would like to try it again, is basically the point. And the working group would like, whether it's constituted with exactly the same membership or not, we'll leave that to the steering committee to determine. But we would see a working group continuing in this general space. The 5 items that we have in this space, the first is a macro level of spectrum efficiency work. This would follow along the activities that we have, put a lot more focus on the receivers, but also a lot more focus on again, the macro level of allocation efficiency, taking the benefit of the system level efficiency, but translating that beyond, and this is some of the work that the PCAS group has actually been heavily focused on, but how we allocate, reallocate, restructure the spectrum allocation system so that we can render spectrum efficiency much more effective. Second item is a much more pragmatic, practical one. How do we overcome the obstacles to operationalizing the 500 megahertz broadband? We see a lot of work going on to follow through on the President and the FCC Chairman's efforts on 500 megahertz broadband, but to operationalize that so that it becomes an effective means of allowing broadband wireless is something we think that the TAC could take on and work through. Third point, we believe that a framework for assessing spectrum usage is a valuable thing for us to look at, and to look at in 3 dimensions. First, the allocation, which is related to the macro efficiency item, but here looking at how things are allocated. Second, looking at the services, where do we stand in terms of the different classes of allocations in terms of their usage versus the allocation. And third, where do we stand in measurements? I mean, this has been my personal hot button, but in measuring the usage, there's a lot that's going on the Hill calling for spectrum usage census and so on, but we believe that we can contribute in that area. Fourth area is a totally new area for us, and this really is Jesse's fault for bringing it up, but the group felt that it was worthy, whether it's in this group or another group, and that is security within the context of wireless IP networks. As we move the world to IP, security is an ever larger issue. And I shared this with the group this morning. In the classroom, I have my students do projects. One of the students chose to do a nice project to demonstrate to the class the ability to use her cell phone to take control of another classmate's cell phone, extract all the information from that cell phone, make calls through that cell phone which were charged to the other student's cell phone, and generally do everything imaginable with that cell phone, and did it as a demonstration in front of the class. She got an A. It is true.
And
she also
started a business.
She also, she also received, and the class received, on behalf of her contributions, a lecture from me on the don't ever do that. It's great that you have learned how to do that. There is an ethical behavior which this is not, but it really brought to bear this point of security and how critical this is in the IP world, and particularly the wireless world when things are out there. Final item for our recommendations is promoting untapped wireless applications. This is a follow-on to our friction point, but beyond the smartphones and the huge number of applications that I've got an app for that we know about, there is a huge domain we still believe in the commercial arena, and in particularly in the machine-to-machine, the M2M area, where looking at wireless applications, understanding how to promote those, to support those is a continuing effort. So those are our 5 ideas for 2005, Mr. Chairman. And that concludes
That's
our
all you want to do,
presentation.
huh?
Well, since we failed this year, we thought we ought to be more
You're planning on
aggressive next
taking the
year
year off.
and
Okay.
accomplish a little more.
The work that you and your group have done this year, has been quite exhaustive. The papers that you have produced, meaningful. This is a whale of a list for going forward. We'll bring that back to the next discussion. Is there anybody that wants to bring up anything with Dennis apropos of the sharing group before we move on? John?
We had also discussed changing the name.
Go ahead, you brought it up.
I mean, seeing as the constant theme is wireless, we had discussed the possibility of changing the name of the group to the wireless group next year. Sharing was sort of the theme of 2011. No more sharing for 2012. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there so people. Okay. If you see a name change, that's where it came from.
Okay. All right. Okay. Hearing no more, John, you going to do the broadband, please?
See me in the back. You got it. We'll take Mike off the hook.
Yeah.
I saw the sweat coming down the side of his face. I'll get it, Mike.
He passed the note as fast as possible, Buckingham.
And we're gonna get through this real quick, Mr. Chairman, so we can get back on schedule and talk about next year. The Broadband Infrastructure Working Group was charted basically to focus on roadblocks and removing those roadblocks that are delaying the deployment of broadband infrastructure. We reported in March on our major, I'll use that. There. That looks like it. I can't see behind me, and Vinton, I agree with you. I can't see my slides either. But anyway, in all seriousness, our chairman, Mr. Lynch, retired on us, left us sort of abandoned, and Paul Mankiewicz from Juniper / soon to be named Cisco or something, stepped in and kind of led us through the last couple of months here. And kudos to Kitty O'Hare and Verizon for allowing us to stay with us and sort of keep us on track. We actually had a fun working group. We had spent a lot of time. We focused on. Let's see if I can get this to it, man. There we go. We focused on some obstacles such as tower siting, permits, rights-of-way issues, infrastructure build-outs, processing, new technologies to facilitate. And the bottom bullet, I think, has been a common theme throughout the day, education. And I think that's where we all need to focus when we go into 2012. How do we educate, not only service providers, but consumers and regulators and state officials and everybody in between. But anyway, there were 5 major recommendations that we put forward in March. I believe all 5 went forward in the chairman's letter to the FCC for action or recommendations. And the first one I don't have to report on because Chairman Janikowski just did that for us and told us that is currently in the hands of the White House, waiting for a possible executive order both on the federal rights-of-way and antennas siting. Big issue there was, if you remember back in March when we discussed this, there was a tremendous difficult process to get across federal rights-of-way, not only just the land-based, but through the bayous of Louisiana and Mississippi and down that way after Hurricane Katrina, so we could rebuild facilities down there. We can't have, the process just to get into a federal building was absolutely incredible to put infrastructure in there. So we're glad to see that one has moved forward. The permitting process that we discussed, not going to go through the whole slide because there's a lot of small words up there or small print, one or the other. But basically what we've asked the FCC to do is to work with municipalities, local governments, and so on to try to streamline the process of getting permits within the municipalities, not the federal rights-of-way. We think we've got that one pretty well covered. But if you get into the state, local municipalities, it's incredible the difficulty that we have trying to get infrastructure built there. We mentioned tower siting, so I'm not going to, review that because that was all included in our federal rights-of-way issues. The technology opportunities that we discussed, and I think we just had another long call on this issue, is we need to get the word out there, and I think it was covered a little bit earlier. of what technologies are available. I think on the small cell workshop was brought up nicely. I think, Paul, you're the one that mentioned it to us, that somebody that owned a big building was complaining about the inability to access a wireless network within the building because, oh, well, there's no cells around here, there's no base stations, and then when the question was presented, well, why don't you put in some femto cells, or why don't you work with the developers to put some infrastructure within the building so that we can put a wireless capability in there and support it through multiple networks. There was like that deer in the headlights, well, gee, is that ours to do? So I think that's where, again, the education needs to be, is that we've got to start working with major developers throughout the country, and as they're planning projects, we need to help them plan the communication structure within that building, because there are a lot of new and inventive technologies that can be used. I'm almost going to make it on time. Building ingress, again, this was one that was discussed late, and of course, some of these slides, you go back into the March and earlier meetings, and you'll find the slides are similar. We've changed the words for this update, so it sounded like we did an awful lot of work. But basically, it's along the same lines. Is that we've got to talk to people about, hey, when you build a building, hey, let's put fiber risers in. Let's make them accessible to any provider that wants to get into that building. Right now, I know some of the major companies who build the risers in there have proprietary rights to that riser within the building. Communication closets, if you will, where equipment can be placed, aren't in the building. I've done an awful lot of work inside buildings in the old networks, and it's absolutely incredible to see all the equipment laying around the floors and cables just out there for somebody to trip over. So all of those things are going to enhance our ability to get this broadband capability out to everyone. Home builders, you've got to start putting in the facilities to carry. I mean, whether you want to do plastic optical fiber within the building, which is a great technology. Unfortunately, it's been used in the auto industry for probably the last 20 years, and we can't seem to figure out how to use it in our own industry. Great little innovative way of saying, hey, I don't have to rewire a home. I can take this little tiny plastic optical fiber that has a bend radius of like that, and put that right behind the baseboard in the house and rewire it, and it'll handle upwards to a meg or 2 megs of traffic over a couple hundred feet. We don't use it. We need to start educating on all of these new opportunities. And with that, I will take any questions, or you can proceed with the rest of your meeting, sir.
Thank you, John. This group came out of the blocks fastest in our first couple of meetings, and thank you for keeping things going. Are any things that anybody wants to bring up to John about the activities of the broadband working group? Great. Okay. Let's go on to talk about what we do next. So if we hit the next slide, thanks, Dan. These are the topics that have been suggested either in a previous meeting or in discussions or otherwise communicated. And let's just look at them for a second. Exercising the prerogative of the chair, let me see if there are a couple of things that we can quickly agree on, and I'm posing these as questions to the group, not as edicts from the chair. But number one, the presentation that Charlotte made, clearly there is more work that has to be done on the IPv6 activity, and so that ought to continue. Clearly on the presentation that Dan made, this list, or maybe a variation of it based upon some of the discussions we had, but we've heard clear indication that the group that is working on the PSTN question wants to come back to us for specific technical input. The third one, Dennis just gave us a laundry list of 5 issues that really expand receiver and go to the sharing word that John doesn't want to use. But that was a serious list of good, provocative questions out of your working group, and with your working group raising their hand saying that they'd like to work on it. Enum, I think, is included inside numbering. Was that your context for that, Dan? So there we are, and I know, Tony, that's something that you had suggested previously when I had asked about things. So if we move that up, so that takes care of Enum. Measuring performance, I'm not sure whether that fits into what Dennis was talking about in terms of network measurement. Opening the 3550, 3650, that's clearly a recommendation that this group has made. It is in the spectrum legislation, if there ever is spectrum legislation, in the Congress. If something like that happens, it's something that the Commission is going to have to implement themselves. I'm not sure that there's more. I think we've made our input there. Access to new network products, E-rate definition, the network needs of the cloud. But are there thoughts upon about this and that kind of an outline? It seems to me that the first three, with the third bullet expanded for Dennis's list, and then the question is, are there others? Because it looks to me as though we've got 5 subgroups in Dennis's operation, okay? 4 subgroups in the PSTN front. We've got the IPv6 group, and I wonder whether that's not enough to say grace over. And if there are any thoughts on that. So David, you were the first to have your flag up, and then we'll come to Vent.
Yeah, I just had a small wordsmithing item. Maybe the train's left the station, but I've constantly been trying to keep the focus. For the spectrum allocation, been trying to always see if we can keep that at the level of small cells rather than limiting it to indoor. And it could be the train's left.
Okay, John wants to comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where we are as well. I think one thing, just to kind of update on the legislation. The bills that are out there right now actually would mandate that the FCC auction that band and with the exclusion zones in the NTIA report. I think as we all know, the status legislation, it's a fairly fluid situation. So we've been trying to educate some people on the Hill that with that band, we don't feel that there's been enough work done yet to understand what's the right approach. We do think it should be, it might be useful for small cells, but we don't know what the right approach in terms of assigning, allocating, that kind of thing is, and we would prefer more flexibility from that regard, from Congress. But I think in the sharing group and in the workshop that we held, it was very much sort of in the spirit of what you're saying.
But do you agree? We've kind of taken this as a tack about as far as we can take it.
Yeah, I think so. I think at this point it's FCC, NTIA, Congress, and then hopefully back to industry if we get the spectrum online.
David, you cool? Okay. Vent.
So a question and an observation. With regard to the 3550 to 3650 band, is it the general sense that licensing implies exclusivity, or does it permit sharing?
I think there's a whole series of thoughts in that perspective, Vince, but I think the view is that it's sharing. I think the real issue that we spent most of the time debating or discussing, depending on what side of the fence you were on, is that that spectrum is really ideal for building small cell networks. because of the exclusions, and John's already talked about some of those issues. I think the question becomes, back to this whole property rights issue, should it be the ownership of the building or the high teledensity areas where the spectrum would be used? Once they deploy networks there, do they then get the rights for, as Dennis said earlier, for the time in which they are managing and running networks in that space? Should they own the spectrum for that function of time or duration of time? But the whole idea is for it to be sharing as opposed to a specific allocation to long-term to a given organization.
I always get nervous about exclusivity having side effects that are not necessarily advantageous. With regard to reference to numbering, I'm beginning to wonder whether we should change our language. This is apropos of Kevin's earlier observations. It's identification or identifiers that are at issue here, not just numbers and numbering. How do we identify endpoints in the system? And we already have a number of ways to do that. The problem is that they are not universal. Some of them are bound to particular services like Skype, for example, or Google Plus, or some of the other social networking mechanisms. If the social networking environment ever rallied around a common way of identifying endpoints, or at least federating identification, we might have a very different kind of mechanism. This doesn't mean that the numbering plans, the E164 structure, would disappear. It just means it would have to interwork in some way with these alternatives.
Okay, valid point. Paul?
Can you hear me? Is it working?
Yep.
So I just want to put a plug in for the cloud topic at the bottom, because it sounds like you were focusing on the top ones. And I think that the technological, it's an emerging area, it's where our networks are going, it's where the PSTN will end up in years to come. And there's tremendous technological and regulatory issues and international issues involved. As well as privacy issues. So I think that looking at very carefully the evolution of the technological and regulatory aspects of this sort of virtualization of the network is a pretty important topic, and it's a topic that the FCC has just begun to start looking at. So I think it's a good thing to help kick off in the FCC too.
Are there other thoughts on the cloud, on Paul's point? Charlie, second, okay. All right.
I would add to it as well. It is becoming a really critical area, and as even from an industry standpoint, the telecommunications players are becoming major contributors to the cloud environment. So it's a natural, not only from a technological standpoint and a future standpoint, it's a natural point of connectivity from the key players that the FCC normally deals with, that is to say the service providers and ISPs and the like.
The only, and I agree on the importance of it, the only question I guess I'd have is whether it's actually the bulk of the problem, the bulk of the problems there are within FCC's mandate. I think a lot of them are not about the communications to the services. It's about privacy issues, data ownership issues, legal issues, all of which are, thorny as hell. I mean, very, very tough questions, clearly in need of some governmental look. I'm just not sure if it's the FCC that's got that mandate.
Paul, you want to
If it is, I have no problem with doing it. I'm just asking, because...
No, I think in the area, in the technology alone, in interoperability, there are a huge number of issues, technological issues, that I do believe, the FCC and its technical expertise. I mean, the FCC has classically been more of a spectrum-oriented, needs to become more network-oriented, and I do believe there are a lot of technological issues to be looked at. It's not just an issue of more fuzzy issues, but real technological interoperability issues. And how do we set up certain standards to be able to make it possible for all technologies to work together.
Is Cisco going to allow you to stay on the TAC so we can task you with this?
Yeah, I can always help, yeah.
Daniel?
I just wanted to echo what Vince said, because I think there's a key point there about the naming conventions as we think about, and it sort of goes back to the PSTN discussion in a general sense about, as we think about this expansive set of services that the Brave New World will bring, what are the naming conventions? And I think in one previous meeting, someone mentioned the distinction between a telephone number being something that reached a place as opposed to an individual. I mean, all of those kinds of notions of names and the properties that go with them need to be thought about as we think about these issues. And we've got a lot of to your point earlier, Tom, there's certain constraints we have to live with, and we just have to work through those. They are what they are, and all we can do is do the best we can.
Go ahead.
Tom, I wanted to recommend a potential topic around Wi-Fi offload. We heard today a little bit about it, and we're certainly seeing a lot of traction in the marketplace, and I think there's a role to be played by FCC.
Such as?
Well, I think such as in the area of interoperability, also as a lot of these venues, whether it's stadiums and other places, look to offload some of its cellular traffic to other technologies. I think for the consumer good, it would be good to set some guidelines and some frameworks for these new vendors and technologies to play with.
So that's kind of a new direction for the commission, because the commission stipulating standards and wireless has been something that they have eschewed, not something that we, not to say that we can't make that recommendation and pursue it. Are there other thoughts around the table on Shahed's comment about Wi-Fi interop?
I think that's an issue that's being addressed commercially right now between the industry, venue owners, etc. I'm not sure I see a need for the FCC in this committee's involvement in that. I think it's more of a commercial. It's really about the venue owners showing an interest in structuring that, as opposed to anything technological or policy related.
Yes. I would echo that. I don't think there's policy issues here. There's a tremendous amount of work already going on in the standards bodies to deal with Wi-Fi offload and how that should work. So I think from a policy point of view, we shouldn't really play in that. I think the industry is moving forward in an expeditious way to deal with that issue.
Clearly, you've raised an important issue. The question is whether there's a nexus here with the agency. Vint.
Go back to the cloud question. There's no doubt that cloud interactions are still immature. In fact, most clouds don't directly interact with each other. There are client-server interactions that are largely web-based. I think it's very, very early days for the FCC to engage in this kind of exploration, because there are about 30 different groups that think they're developing standard ways of interacting between clouds. Look, clouds are basically time-sharing on steroids. They have other properties that are better than time-sharing because of the scalability, variable ability to deliver memory and processing. They also introduce collaborative mechanisms that would be hard to do without the cloud platform. But I believe it's very premature for the FCC to get into a policy space with regard to clouds until we actually understand what we can do with them.
Paul, back to you.
So I agree with Vint. I think it is early days, but my pushback would be that this is the time to get involved, to basically help educate the FCC on what it needs to be paying attention to. So I agree with you, but at the same time, there are organizations, there are service providers who are, with some minor public statements, developing, cloud CDN exchanges, right? And so much like we talk about number portability, there'll be CDN exchanges set up, and it's a good time to start paying attention to those things, to understand how they operate in the public.
So I am reminded of my very first job when I came to Washington in 1976. Before I stepped foot at DARPA, I think Dale is going to remember this, I was asked to brief the FCC, this is when Dick Wiley was chairman, on the convergence of computers and communication, 1976. I still have the slides.
Computer
It
inquiry.
only took 34 years to kind of get to where we imagined we could go. So educating the commissioners about cloud, I think, is not unreasonable. But I think it would be premature to suggest to them that there is a policy space for them to take action in or for us to make recommendations in.
So let me see if I can posit a slate, if you will, and that slate would be IPv6, what Dan assigns us for PSTN, the 5 points that Dennis has laid out under the sharing or whatever we call it, okay? And that's the slate. I think that's a huge assignment to take off, particularly when you consider Dennis's 5 points and Dan's 10. I am ready to be overruled for the cloud issue, Paul, if it's the will of the group. But can we agree on those three, the first three bullets, as Dennis amends for, and I think his numbering ends up getting amended by as broader issue of identification. Can we agree on those? Going once, going twice? Yeah. I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't see you down there, Tom. I'm sorry.
I think I can agree on those with some modification as we go into them. It was interesting to hear Charlie, who hasn't been here, question why we're saying there's a need for FCC action, for example, on the PSTN transition, since it's a transition that's happening anyway, and since some of the action is away from the FCC. I think those of us who have been working on it do see some public policy issues that have to be addressed, but I'd suggest that we start the year by somewhat screening the areas that we're already working on to make sure that that presumption that there's an FCC, they may be interesting questions, but the presumption needs to be challenged periodically that there's an FCC role in addressing a particular issue. So I think we should look at that in the areas assigned to the critical transitions and the other workforce, other groups. The other thing I think we should look at is interactions between the groups. We've been fairly siloed. If part of what we're doing in critical transitions is saying what attributes are necessary in the broadband network, which is, like it or not, going to be the replacement and much more than the PSTN, is one of those answers possibly IPv6? Is there an interaction with the deployment of small cells in order to get coverage inside of areas and to get universality? So I think each group has done a very good job in its own silo this year, but if there's a possible way to do it, there are some overlaps that that could be constructive and that we ought to explore.
Taken on board. Good point. Jesse?
No, I just wanted to echo what Tom was saying. I think there's some major issues where we need to work with IPv6 people vis-a-vis high teledensity, small cell wireless type applications, right? So I just wanted to echo what Tom, what he just said.
Harvey?
Yeah. One of the issues that came up at the December 6th workshop and also in the broadband infrastructure group was the fact that pole attachment and duct access today is limited to telecommunications service providers.
Right.
And if we move into a future in which there are no, quote, telecom service providers, then we have a real problem with access. And that is definitely a regulatory issue for the FCC.
Yeah, and Mark and I have had, N+1 conversations about this. It is the difficulty is it is a policy issue. It is pretty clearly statutorily lined out right now, and other than flagging it, which you and Mark and others, I'm not sure what the role of this technical advisory committee is, other than say, excuse me guys, this is a problem, and we're limited by the legal constraints, the statutory constraints. Okay, can we go back to the three issues? Is there consensus on those three?
Just enumerate, just make sure.
They're the first three bullets. IPv6, which is continuation of the work that Charlotte's doing. There is on PSTN transition work or PSTN evolution, or whatever we're calling it, it has these 4 points, but it's really looking to Dan, who's just in the process of putting things together, to say, Dan, task us. And in the third bullet, it's the 5 points that Dennis raised, which is macro-level spectral efficiency, overcoming obstacles to operationalizing the 500 megahertz, framework for assessing spectrum usage, security within IP networks, and promoting untapped wireless apps, the Internet of Things issue. I mean, that, we'll be busy.
Say, Tom,
Yeah.
I assume it's okay that if we as individuals wish to switch to a different one of the groups, right?
So,
in fact, I might actually encourage a certain amount of that just to get, us out of the same people who've been thinking about a set of problems for a year, thinking about them for another year with no...
We are going to change hats.
Okay.
In the new year, we are going to change hats. I want to, first of all, I'm serious what I said at the outset, folks. Please send me an email, call me, whatever, say, hey, this is a topic I want to be involved in, or this is a topic I'd like to chair the working group on. Working with the staff task force that we've got here, we're going to sit down and go through the list, plus a list of new people who are going to be coming on to try and populate it and bring it back to you. But don't make us guess. I mean, the amazing thing is that a lot of us were new to each other at the beginning of this year, and thank God that we had the kind of chairman and support that we did, that we guessed right. But please raise your hand as to what you want to get involved in. Walt.
Yeah, I just want to add, if anybody has a suggestion for either a company or people we should include as we look to level, please make suggestions. So we'd be very interested in your viewpoints on how we ought to rebalance the group and what we're lacking in terms of skills that we ought to bring on. So if you have some great ideas, just pass them on.
Julie.
Just to underscore, Dennis mentioned it, but of the 5 things, one of them was wireless security, and it wasn't clear whether our group had the right makeup or whether that should be a separate group. So just to keep that in mind, too.
And I'll be back to each of the chairmen to discuss this as well. Okay, have we got it on this? Going once, going twice? Sold. Now, Paul, I don't want to shut you out on your issue. Is there a consensus in the group that we want to add to that list to Paul's point? I think it is, personally, I think that, I'm worried about the management assignment that we have just taken on here, which is non-trivial. B, I think that there are policy issues that are involved here, but I'm kind of with Vint that they're policy issues that are not technology driven at this point in time, less than they are operationally driven in terms of interrelationships. But again, if you guys want to do, we will. John?
Just a suggestion that if any person on the TAC would like to sort of do a smaller scale study, maybe get a couple of people together, then they should be able to bring an issue forward and say, I think there is more here to do, and
Great
just
point.
an initial investigation, and have a chance to present that back to the whole group with some discussion with the chair. Seems like a great idea.
You want to go that way, Paul?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. You win the Henry Kissinger Award for diplomacy.
Bailed Tom out.
Okay, is there anything else? We have, we're 8 minutes until our appointed hour. We always end on time or before time. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring to the group? If not, we cannot say thank you enough for the serious work that got done this year. Look forward to working with all of you and the new folks that will be coming in next year, and hope you all have great holidays. Thank you.
You can assume the dates are final, what we talked about?
No. You'll be getting email.
Don't assume anything.
You are new, aren't you? Based on today's discussion, I'll send out an email for any final voting.